Hello and welcome. This is going to be video number one in a four-part series about imperialism. In this series, we're going to talk about what imperialism was and is, for that matter, and also I guess the focus is going to be on imperialism in Africa, late 19th century, early 20th century, so late 1800s, getting into the early 1900s. And so we'll take a look at some examples of how imperialism played out in Africa. Now, imperialism is something that has taken shape in various ways in places throughout the world, but we'll keep our focus relatively narrow. Well, in this first video, the main emphasis is going to be just to talk about what imperialism even is, and that'll basically be it. So here we go. All right, so imperialism is our topic. Now, the place I like to start when talking about imperialism is with the definition that I use, kind of a working definition that I use. Imperialism is somewhat of an abstract topic, so it can be a little difficult at times to comprehend. So hopefully using this definition and keeping this definition in mind as we go through the video series and talk about various things that came with imperialism, it'll help it make sense for you. So if you just look at the screen, the definition, and I'll just read it. One group takes over the territory of another group and then dominates them politically, socially, and economically. So to a certain degree, with imperialism, there's a bit of a connection to the idea of colonization for a country. But the key difference is with colonization, and we saw some of this when Europeans sailed west away from Europe looking for a water route to the west to Asia, that when they encountered new land and figured out that they were in new places, they began to establish colonies. Even though that had an impact on people that were living there, their focus, at least in the beginning with colonization, was really to just establish themselves in a new place, not necessarily to take over the people that were there and completely change them and dominate them. There's certainly examples of interactions that might lean in that direction, but the main thing was just establish themselves in a new place and see what they could do with that. With imperialism, it takes that just further. And so when you focus on the part where it says dominate them politically, socially, and economically, with imperialism, and part of why it can maybe even be spoken of in somewhat of a sinister way, is you basically have one group who, in order to do this, is more dominant than the people that they encounter. And our focus here with imperialism is going to primarily be European imperialism. The United States has engaged in imperialism as well. But for our purposes, let's keep it simple and focus on England. They were probably one of the countries that imperialized to the greatest degree. So you take a country like England, and so they want to go basically establish themselves and establish their presence somewhere else. So just generally, we'll say in Africa. And so to dominate these people politically, socially, and economically, what it means is they basically come in and they take over, and the political system that is consistent with England becomes the political system that is imposed on the people that they are now coming to dominate. So the people are expected to fall in line with the way of governing and making decisions, the way that England does it. And then socially, the expectation is that the people that they have taken over and are coming to dominate will adopt living styles and really cultural characteristics consistent with England. So a good example would be things like the clothing that people wear. Even if the people they come to dominate didn't initially wear clothing that was similar to how English people would dress, an expectation would be they would be buying English-made clothing and beginning to live as the English people lived. And then economically, that basically the economic system of England and the way transactions took place in England would become the way transactions would take place for these people who were now being dominated. So it's basically one country coming in and imposing their will and basically converting the people that they've come to dominate to being like them. Now, as far as why this came about when it did, one of the big picture reasons really is industrialization. And we'll talk about other details that went along with it in later videos. But for right now, just focus on the idea that the Industrial Revolution is really the big picture driver for this. because as countries like England began to industrialize, there were some things that they needed, or really want is probably a better word. They probably felt like they needed them, and that was the desire for new marketplaces to sell the products they were making, and also new places to get raw materials to make the things that they were making. And so, for example, if you take a country like England looking to a place like Africa, what they saw there were places where not only could they access raw materials cheaply, because if they took over the region, then they could simply just take those resources. They wouldn't have to buy them from somebody. They would just take them. And that if they could make the people live as they lived, then they could produce the kinds of things that those people would end up buying. And so they could greatly increase the marketplace for selling goods. So the Industrial Revolution definitely was a driver for imperialism. But as I said, there's some other things that are in play as well, but I'll get into those in a later video. So for now, that's where I want to leave it. I just wanted to introduce the idea of imperialism, and then over the next 3 videos, we'll talk about situations and circumstances where this idea played out, and hopefully that'll make clear what imperialism was, anything that maybe was beneficial of it, but also take note of things that were challenges with it as well. So hopefully this has been a helpful and informative video. Thanks for watching.